When I'm doing things that make me feel the most alive, inevitably I have just noticed, like, I get opportunities to keep doing that.
Thanks so much for joining me today. I really appreciate you being here. Today's episode was produced by Isolde Trachtenberg and is copyright 2020. As
Hi,
always,
welcome
please
to the
remember
Innovative
this is for
Mindset
educational
Podcast.
and
I'm your
entertainment
host, Isolde
purposes only.
Trachtenberg.
Past performance
On the show,
does
you'll
not
get my
guarantee
conversations
future
with
results.
top-performing
Although
thought
we
leaders,
can always
creatives,
hope.
and
Until next
entrepreneurs.
time, this is
Every
Isolde
week, I bring you the
Trachtenberg, and I
latest
send
scoop on
you
what these
all of my
incredible
love.
people do to succeed.
And how you can get their secrets and do it too. And hey, do you want to become a member of the Innovative Virtuoso Club? Our virtuosos get all sorts of exclusive content like bonus episodes just for you and videos to boost creative adrenaline and problem-solving juice. Go to isoldet.com/virtuoso to learn more. And now, let's get on with the show. Hello, and welcome to the Innovative Mindset Podcast. My name is Isolde Trachtenberg, and I am thrilled, so happy that you're here. I'm also really excited to introduce you to today's guest, Mark Blankenship. Mark is a journalist, podcaster, and event host. He's the founding editor of The Flash Paper, theflashpaper.com. It's a print-only journal in which artists respond to current events in a variety of genres. He also hosts the podcasts Mark and Sarah Talk About Songs and the Show Tune Countdown. Both are amazing. And his writing has appeared in the New York Times, Variety, Fortune, New York, Playbill, and many others. And you're going to know a lot more about him by the time we're done, but I'm going to give you the website anyway. It's markgblankenship.com. So you can learn even more about him than you're going to learn in this podcast episode. But for now, I am super thrilled to welcome Mark. Mark, I'm so glad that you're here.
Oh my gosh, it is such a treat. Thank you very much for having me.
Oh, this is so much fun. It's funny. We met because a mutual friend introduced us, and we realized we had so much in common that we became fast friends. And here we are today.
It's true. It was, as we were talking, it was one of those situations where I felt like, had we actually known each other for a lot longer than just the last half hour?
Right.
It kind of felt like we did.
It really did, and I was thrilled that you were willing to get to know me even better by being on the show, because as I said to you before we started recording, this is a chance for us to chat, to get to know each other better, and also for me to talk to you about things like some of the things that you're doing as a journalist, as a podcaster, as an event. You have so much going on. What's up with that? Are you like me? Are you bored easily? Or what is it that keeps you so excited about doing so many different things?
You know, I guess it's a little bit nature and a little bit nurture. When I first left graduate school back in 2005, I was making my full-time living for several years as a freelance journalist, which meant I was constantly working on multiple projects at once, writing articles for different publications, hosting talkbacks after plays, doing all kinds of things simultaneously. And I just found that I really liked that. It's something about the constant mental stimulation and the opportunity to combine ideas across projects. Like, what I'm thinking about doing one thing might influence my thinking about another thing. It just keeps my mind feeling like it's being stretched and pushed. And I really feel much more awake when that is the case. And also at this point, that's just how I'm so used to working that I just don't know if I would know how to function if I only had one thing to do. I think, like you said, I might start to feel a little bit restless, like hamster in a cage or something.
Yeah, I completely understand. I have been accused of being involved in too many things for my own good, but I maintain that that's a way to keep yourself stimulated and excited. And it's really what my instincts tell me to do. They don't tell me to ignore things I'm interested in, and instead to pursue them and to learn about them. And I get this whole curiosity thing going, and then I'm off to the races. And there's something that you do that I think is really interesting. I've heard you say that you listen to your gut, and I'd love it if you would talk about what that means, particularly since you're such a creative person. What does listening to your gut mean, and what does it have to do with creativity and what you're going to do in the world?
Yeah, I have found that there have been many times in my life when at the end of a project or the end of doing something, I have just known on a very deep level, this is what I was put on the world to do as a professional person. There are just
Hmm.
times when I can feel that it has made me whole in a way. And that can be kind of an overwhelming feeling sometimes, that idea of like, oh my gosh, this was so satisfying. And I used to have this, how to put it? What I used to feel a certain amount of grief in a way when one of those moments was over, because I was like, oh gosh, how will I ever get that back again? But now that I'm a bit older, I have realized that each time that I have an experience that makes me feel whole, especially as a professional, that is another opportunity to learn how to articulate what it is that I need to be doing.
Hmm.
And I have now, I guess, spent years and years just trying to make mental notes about those moments. And so now that I have, I think, a pretty good sense of what makes me feel the most awake, the most alive, my gut tells me almost at the beginning of any experience, is this going to work or not? Because I'm now pretty sensitive to the way that people talk, or the energy that they bring into an experience, and I'm pretty sensitive to whether or not it's going to feed that. And I'll be honest, I don't always have the luxury of only choosing those experiences that I know in my gut are going to be really exhilarating for me, because sometimes I need to make ends meet and I pick up projects here and there. But I have found that the more that I just follow the things that feel like they're feeding the part of me that I know I'm meant to be, or that I'm meant to develop, the more that those projects seem to just sort of naturally evolve into something sustainable and good. I know that's pretty vague, but I hope that answers your question to some extent.
It does. And it's interesting because that idea of the more you know, the more, meaning the more you know, I think is great and wonderful. But what happens in those times when you have to pay the rent? How do you reconcile what your gut is telling you to do versus the necessity of sort of the more realistic and practical aspects of living, paying the rent, paying the bills, taking jobs or projects or activities that are designed to do that? How do you console your gut in those instances?
It's a great question. I come from the theater world, and as we're recording this, I am still someone who was laid off from my job because of COVID. So
Mm,
I am definitely in a place right now where I need to say yes to things because I don't have a job. And
right.
I mean, I have things that I'm working on and things that I have created and things that I'm proud of that do pay me, but not enough that I can then just turn it all off otherwise. So I guess it's like I'm thinking right now, like I'm currently working on a feature for a website about some television series that I'm not that interested in,
Mm,
but that they're going to pay me pretty well. And they allow me to work with an editor whom I like. So I guess at this point, there were times when I was younger, in the very beginning of my freelance writing career, I would take anything. I took jobs where there was really no upside except the check, which very often came late. And now I just think, well, if I'm not super interested in the subject matter of what I'm writing about, I at least need to be working with an editor that I like, or publishing on a website that I like, or in a publication that I like. And then the other thing is, I have gotten pretty adept as a journalist, especially at finding my way into almost anything in a manner that lets me be interested by it. So the television show that I'm about to write about, it's again, I'm not that, I just, it's not my kind of show. But what I am interested in is how this show has dismantled its old way of doing things so that it can come back under social distancing regulations. So what the story is going to end up being about is, how does a creative professional completely overhaul their work so that it can suit this unexpected new normal? And I guess that it's never going to be an outcropping of the things that I feel like I'm meant to do in the world, which I guess we can get into more explicitly later. But so long as it's like still engaging and interesting, and I feel a little, so let me put, so long as my point of view and what I'm trying to learn as a reporter is still something that feels a little bit tantalizing to me, I can make it work for myself.
And see, that's really interesting what you just said. As long as there's something that feels tantalizing, that feels compelling, the rest kind of can fall into place. And there's something there. There's a nugget there that I'm wondering, what is the process that you go through to find that thing that's going to be exciting to you or compelling to you? Is
Yeah.
there a conscious process there, or is it something that you've just honed over the years of doing it?
So part of it is just, I know what I'm interested in. I'm
Mm,
interested in structure. I'm interested in the structure of narratives. I'm interested in the structure of stories. And I'm interested in the structures that people create to do their work. If I can talk to someone about the specific choices that they make to get through a project, to make a project come to pass,
mhm.
I'm always going to learn something from that. And that's always going to be interesting to me. So at the end of the day, I I guess have to be somewhat obstinate about the fact that that's just always what I'm going to ask you about if I'm interviewing you and you're an artist. Like there are so many places in the world where you can find writing and reporting about artists that cover, like, what did you eat today? What designer are you wearing? And those things are interesting to an extent to me, but they're not that interesting to me. And for other
Mhm,
people, they're very interesting. So those people should do that.
mhm.
For me, I just have to have faith that I can write about what I'm interested in an interesting way and just keep asking the types of questions that matter to me. And there's a certain amount of, I guess, selfishness in that. Like I built my entire career as a journalist on the idea that if I'm interested in it, it'll make a story that other people are interested in. And that has helped me, I think, have a pretty good career as a journalist and to write a lot of pieces that I'm proud of. And just having faith that I can tell the difference between something that is interesting to me and isn't, and then doing my best to always choose the former over the latter.
It's so interesting, that idea of asking the kinds of questions that you actually wanna know the answer to
Yeah.
is, that it looks self-evident when you look at it that way, but I'm not sure how often we do that. I focus on that idea of thinking up the creative, thinking up the innovative, dreaming it up, and what the process then is of making it come into the world. That's my area of curiosity, if you will. And so that's why I'm asking these questions, because I'm wondering, when you're in the process of writing these stories, crafting the pieces that you're doing, justifying it to yourself sounds like it's not even a problem. I know what I'm interested in, I know what I'm not interested in, and that's great. But what about, quite frankly, the practical marketability of those stories? Have you found that when people read those stories that they go, "Oh, I didn't realize this was going to be so cool," or have you had other kinds of reactions to your work?
Well, frankly, I have always been in a position where one of two things is happening. Either I'm pitching ideas about stories to editors, and I
Mhm.
bake into the pitch the point of view that I want to take. I've done
Mm.
enough research about the play, the movie, the piece of music to know that I want what my hook would be in terms of asking process oriented practical questions.
Mhm.
So if the editor says yes, that means that I've done the work there, and I can assume that the editor, thus the publication, are interested in my point of view. So I just go full steam ahead. Or I'm the editor of the magazine myself, and then guess what? I like it. I'm doing it. And when I was the editor of a magazine that I created called TDF Stages, which is an online magazine of Theater Development Fund, an organization in New York that is probably best known for the TKTS booth, but
Mm.
that does lots of things to connect audiences to theater. When I was the editor of TDF Stages, I just, brashly or not, just trusted that if I was publishing stories that I was interested in, and that I was able to, when I was interviewing someone, just be curious about them and listen to them and ask them questions about what made me intrigued by them. And if I assigned other writers to do the same, that the audience would follow. And they did. And the fact of the matter is that TDF Stages is not People Magazine. We never had that massive readership, but I was content to be well, to quote a musical, I was content to be 9 people's favorite thing instead of 100 people's ninth favorite thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I just trusted, like, I'm not so special that the things that interest me are only interesting to me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not like that much of an iconoclast. I think a lot of people are curious about process and the way that art gets made. And I have a knack for talking about those things in an engaging, interesting way. And I'm good at interviewing people because I care about what they have to say, and I'm curious I'm curious about what they have to say. And so, like, yeah, eventually we found our level, and we had like 70,000 readers a month, and that was awesome. And I guess it's like I have consciously decided that I would rather continue to do the things that feel authentic to me and feel honest about what I'm legitimately curious about, instead of going after some sort of mythical mass audience, because otherwise I'm just going to lose. I don't want to make something bland. I'd rather make a thing that feels specific.
Absolutely. And that idea of specificity becomes even more important as we drill down into that thing that makes us curious to begin with. So I completely understand what you're saying, and yet many people have doubts. So when you have doubt about your gut instincts, how do you deal with them? Or do you let them move you because they're responses to what you wanted to do or what you thought you wanted to do? Or do you go with the original plan because that's what your gut told you to do?
I guess it almost depends on the day, really. I mean, right now, I certainly have days when I think I will never get another job. I'll never work again. Everything I've ever done was for naught. The theater's dismantled. Like, I definitely have those dark moments.
Mm,
But then it's like I just keep coming back. I try to just come back to, okay, well, again, I have been fortunate enough to have a lot of things happen to me as a professional that I found exhilarating. So, what is it about those things that I can try to recreate? Not the specifics of the project, although sometimes it's that, but like, what is the context that I can put myself in that will allow me to feel that way again? Because that, when I'm doing things that make me feel the most alive, inevitably I have just noticed, like, I get opportunities to keep doing that, and I get money comes and opportunities come, and like one thing leads to another. So I, the doubt is sometimes very strong, but when I am able to get a little perspective, which fortunately, as I'm older now, I can usually get out of the doubt spiral
hmm
pretty quickly. It just comes back to, okay, well, make a plan, sit down, think through what is it that you want to feel about the work that you're doing today? What do you want to have accomplished at the end of the day that you will feel good about? And for me, that often means, like, have I made space for someone else to be heard today? That is a thing that I often use as a touchstone, because I know in my heart and my gut that that's what I'm supposed to be doing. So, okay, sometimes I have doubt and I think, oh my God, I'll just go try to get a job doing X, Y, and Z thing that I don't really care about, but that will be stable and secure. And then I think, okay, or I can pursue this other thing and trust that I'll continue to have the stability and security that I found multiple times over and over. Like, I've been fortunate enough to always be fine. So despite the moments of crippling doubt. So I think, okay, well, I want to make sure that people feel heard. I also want to make sure that I am honoring my love for and skill for talking to people, interviewing people, making them feel relaxed. What can I do that might fuse those two things together? And then this is such an important part of it, Isolde. Then I think, well, who do I know that I can ask questions about? To whom can I ask questions as I navigate what I'm trying to figure out? And one of the things that has helped me keep doubt at bay is remembering that I'm not alone, and I don't have to do it by myself. That the capital R romantic myth of the lone hero who accomplishes everything in isolation is actually very damaging. And so anytime that I have conversations with people, and I just try to go into it in a way of, I like this person, they're interesting, they seem to have a good perspective. I ask them, can we just have a conversation about this idea or this thing? And by this idea, I don't mean this specific project I'm working on. I mean, like, I want to talk about how we make sure as theater people that we let people's voices be heard. Those conversations end up making me feel so much better because they remind me I'm not the only person in the world who thinks about these things. And they so often help me see a path forward to collaborating with someone, to creating something. So I guess this is my very long-winded way of finally realizing what I'm trying to say and answer your question about doubt, which is I feel doubt, and then I try to use things I know to be true about myself and the input of people I care about as a way to help me move through it.
I feel like I need to put a big punctuation, full stop. Yeah, absolutely. That makes so much sense, because perspective seems like it's a big part of that, and so are relationships, right? So if you have
Right.
these relationships with people that can maybe assuage the doubt or be part of working through the doubt, then you're still able to keep creating in the world. And there's something that you said, Mark, that I kind of want to tease out a little bit more. You said, "Oh, but we can talk about what I'm meant to do in the world later." And
Mm.
I can't think of a better time to ask, what are you meant to do in the world? You personally, Mark Blankenship, what is your sole purpose?
So I just really believe that I am meant to make people feel safe when they need to explain who they are and what they believe.
Hmm.
And I believe that I am supposed to create environments where people feel empowered to speak and people know that they are being heard. I have a knack, like I keep saying, for talking to people, for listening to people. I'm endlessly curious about what people are thinking and what they're doing. So I just want to keep putting that out there so that other people can then be like, so that people can say what they need to say. And I also believe that I am meant to be building frames that other people can then fill with things. I get a real kick out of being the person who creates the context for something and
Mm-hmm.
then inviting other people to fill it up with whatever they need.
Mm.
And that is, I brought up the capital R romantic hero a minute ago, and it is, we don't live in a world that encourages us to, let me put it this way. I have felt a lot of pressure in my professional life to be the star, to be the one who's doing it, to be the CEO. And that pressure has come at me because of things I've internalized. I wasn't, the way I've interpreted things, but it's been so liberating for me to keep remembering that I am at my happiest and doing my best work and doing things that really I feel matter when I am using my individual energy and skill to create a crucible for other people.
Okay, I get it. And yet, what does that mean? Because if you are creating a crucible, does that mean let me give you an example from my own life. I will start the organization, make it so that it flourishes, and then hand it off so I can go start something else kind of person.
Mm-hmm.
Is it that kind of paradigm that we're talking about, or is there something more internal and perhaps psychological at work in the way you begin these things to create this space, to hold space for other people to have their say?
I think I kind of inadvertently started getting at the answer to this question a moment ago. I have struggled in my whole life with a feeling of intense alienation
Hmm.
and isolation. So
Mm.
what I'm constantly hungry for is a group that accepts me. And even though I have those in my personal life, the embedded hunger is so deep that I feel like what has happened professionally is I have now become someone who's really good at making groups and letting other people feel welcomed in them. And so I don't want to leave because I want to be in the group too.
Mm.
It's just, so I feel like what I can consistently drawn to are environments where I can be generative and creative and a leader, but I can be a leader in the context of a larger group of people. And I feel like as a leader, I'm successful when I'm like listening to other people, when I know what they want, when I know what they're trying to say. I'm thinking specifically about, for instance, the community that we've built around Mark and Sarah Talk About Songs, which is my pop music podcast that I co-host with my friend Sarah. We have a community of listeners that has become so engaged and active with us. And some of them have become my actual friends, like in real life because of the podcast. And they communicate with us on social media. They communicate with us through live events. They communicate with us through live stream happy hours that we do every week. These are people who their feedback is shaping the show. Every month on Mastis, we donate 10% of our revenue from the podcast to a music-based charity, and it's our listeners who help us choose which charity we're going to donate to every month. And so they're like really guiding us. But Sarah and I are still like at the, we're still like the leaders of the thing.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, that interplay of like getting to be creative and really getting to be the not being beholden to anyone but my own desires, or Sarah is my great partner in this, but like getting to have that sort of leadership opportunity, but also getting to do it within this community of people. It's really awesome. And I've often thought about, I sometimes feel like what I'm after is like some sort of secular preacher experience where like, I don't want to I don't want to be the leader of an actual church, but I want to create environments where people can feel the type of succor, SUCCOR, that they get from perhaps a spiritual community that matters to them. Like, I don't want to be a spiritual guide, but I do want to be someone who just keeps creating environments where people feel seen and heard. And like at the end of the day, I don't want to leave, like I said, because I want that too. I'm getting really like, I don't really talk about this very much. I hope it makes sense.
It makes perfect sense. And I took a minute to sort of let that sink in. My design for this podcast, kind of like you wanting to make space for people to have their say, I really want this show to be something where my guests feel safe to really dig deep into some of this stuff, because I think it's really important. I think it's important for us to build that self-awareness.
Yeah.
And then once we know who we really are deep down on the inside, that starts to inform everything else we do. And I think you're doing that the same thing with the groups that you start. So when you build that self-awareness, Mark, when you're in that space of really knowing who you are, how do you decide or develop or create or ignite that idea for a project? Like, where does that come from? Where does the inspiration for the things that you're trying to do come from, if you're doing it from that space of
Right.
know who I am?
There have been a couple of times when I'll hear something and I'll just immediately know, oh, that's the context. The Flash Paper is this publication that I have recently launched. By the time this episode of your podcast drops, we'll be just about to release issue 2.
Yeah.
It is a publication where theater artists are invited to respond to a prompt about an urgent current event in any genre that they choose: plays, manifestos, comic books, sheet music, photo essays, it doesn't matter. And about a year and a half ago, by the time that your listeners hear this, I was talking to a friend of mine and learned that he had started a publishing company, and he had found this economic model that would allow him to have very low overhead, high profit margin. It's all through through print on demand, and have high profit margin. And it immediately occurred to me, oh, if you have a high profit margin and no overhead, that means you can divvy up the profits among a group of contributors. It just instantly, I was like, that is a thing that would be awesome. So now I am the editor of a publication that has 10 to 12 contributors per issue, and we divide up the profits equitably among everyone, including myself and my designer, who's my partner in the project. So there's like this opportunity now to like make this thing that gets all of their voices heard. And I realized kind of after the fact, it's exactly it's exactly all the stuff we were just talking about. People's voices are getting heard, they're getting paid, I'm getting paid, but I am the person who is editing all of the pieces. I'm sort of shaping the tone of the communal experience, if you will. And the inspiration for that just happened. It's just like, I feel like I think about these things so much, and I think so much about what it is that I'm trying to do, that I was prepared for the luck when it arrived, if that makes sense.
Well, it sounds like there was a convergence of a bunch of information that you would have needed to know, like the low overhead, high profit possible printing situation, and then knowing that there was a community of people who might not always have their views heard or who might need that space. And it sounds like it comes right back to this idea of holding space for other people to have their
Yes.
say. And so let me ask you, you were talking about collaboration. And when you are the one in charge, how do you develop an atmosphere of collaboration, an environment of collaboration with the people who are working with you? What do you do to make that happen, to foster it?
Right. So, interestingly, the two projects that I'm working on right now that are the most satisfying to me and seem to have the brightest financial prospects, certainly earning me the most money right now, I am the co pilot of both of them.
Hmm.
Sarah is the other member of Mark and Sarah Talk About Songs, and she and I have this wonderful working relationship where we really listen to each other. We talk through things thoroughly. We check in with each other. We get things completed very quickly when we tell the other person that we're going to do them. We just have built a really great amount of trust together.
Hmm.
So that vibe that we have together then dictates how we work with our listeners, that we ask them questions and then we're very clear about our responses, and it's like that sort of shared clarity of communication. And it's also true with Ben, who is my collaborator with on the flash paper. Like, we just also again have this very clear, very upfront relationship in terms of how we work together, that it just, we keep each other honest, and we're very like compassionate with one another, and it's awesome. So I am thinking though also about when I was the editor of TDF Stages, when I was editing people, I just felt like it was important for me to call them on the phone with edits to their pieces, and to start each editing session by asking them, what is it that you most want to communicate with the piece that you've written? And I wouldn't jump right in and be like, here's what I want to change, here's what I want to edit. I mean, I would definitely have ideas, but I would always say, like, again, what is it that you're trying to say here? And I would just listen to them as they told me what they wanted their piece to articulate. And very often, if it was a piece that needed some help, they would say more clearly than they had written what they were trying to get across. And then I would go from that as a way to offer my editing notes. And then crucially, I would ask the writer, based on our conversation, to make the edits themselves rather than doing it myself. So it was an attempt to guide a piece toward where I knew it needed to go, but allowing myself to learn from the writer what the final shape that it would take. Like, I didn't want to step in assuming that I already knew the answers when I was editing a piece. I wanted to step in and say, okay, tell me more. And then together we can get there. And that's actually the approach that I took with the pieces that are in the flash paper, because I edited all 12 of them. And I find that offering up of validity to the writer's intention doesn't happen very much. I've experienced so much myself as a writer who's edited. A lot of times editors just quote unquote fix it and give it back to you. And then you're like, well, okay, this changes a lot of what I was trying to say. And I understand that a lot of editors are under time pressure. You don't always have time to do that. But I really believe that you create a healthier environment if you let people's intentions be part of the editing process, because you have to trust that the people that you're working with are smart and sensitive people, and they will often show you that that is true if you just ask them questions. And then you step back into your role as the boss or whatever, and you mold things based on what you've learned. But that moment of letting them know that what they have to say counts, and then demonstrating that you mean it by the things that you do next, is so important.
I could not agree more. It's so interesting to hear you say that, this idea of keeping the other person feeling valid and valuable, there's something so powerful in just that idea, that you will then be able to work together on the project, on the story, on the article, whatever it is, in a way that feels empowering to you both. And yet at the same time, as the boss, as the editor, to me, you're showing amazing, terrific, wonderful leadership skills, because you're helping clarify for them what the story might be
Right.
from their perspective, while at the same time funneling down to the essence of what they were trying to say. Now, somewhere in that process, it seems like there's almost a transfer between what their original intent was that might not have been clear over to you, where you then have to step back enough to see that they might not be as clear as they might have wanted to be. And then you help them clarify and funnel down into that clarity. Does that process, what can you talk about what that is for you? How do you notice that they weren't as clear as they might have been? And then how do you empower them to find that clarity and then also to verbalize it?
Yeah, okay, I have a copy of the flash paper in front of me, so I'm just thinking about the process on some of these pieces.
Perfect.
Like we have there's a really great manifesto in here. Well, actually, even better, the penultimate piece number 11 of 12, is this writer wrote this wonderful essay in which she talks about making the theater more just. And she writes about some of the injustices that she herself has experienced as a woman of color in the theater. And then she fuses those personal experiences with these very detailed suggestions about how we can then change things. Like it's a really astonishing work. And there were just a couple of places in there where I just, as a voracious and attentive reader, was starting to feel a little lost. And I was like following, boop, oh, that's not quite clear to me. So the conversation around those moments was, okay, tell me what it is that you want here. And it was just basically reading through and making an actual physical note on the printout I had of her draft and being like, okay, in this section, tell me what you mean. Then she tells me, and then I say, okay, because this, and then I think, okay, that's what you're saying. So what if we tried this? What if we move this here? That's how I'm responding based on what you're saying. Does that make sense to you? And sometimes she said yes, and sometimes she said no. But it was like, I guess it was just making notes when I felt confused and then digging deeply into them later. And that partially just comes from the fact that I went to graduate school for dramatic criticism and dramaturgy. So I'm literally trained in narrative structure. And I have years of training in noticing when the thinking inside writing is going askew.
And yet, that very training allows you the opportunity to, it sounds like, stay fluid enough to see where it could go. And
Yes.
so can you talk a little bit about what that means? How do you use your training and use your ability to engage people to help them tease it out of whatever it is they're trying to say?
I just keep coming back to the idea of it's so important for me to be curious about people and to ask them what they mean. And then it's that very conscious practice of someone says something to me and then I say back to them, this is what I'm hearing you say. Is that correct? And then if they're like, yes, this is what I'm trying to say, then I will say, okay, well then structurally, I would recommend doing this and this because I think that this is going to make a stronger argument. And it's important here to also note that I have to have confidence in myself enough to suggest making changes. Like once I understand what they're going for, it's then my job to go in and make changes. And I have to not cede my confidence in my own professional ability as the editor. But it's all rooted in my choices being made based on information that they give me and me being curious enough to figure out exactly what they're trying to say. Because if I'm not curious, then I will inevitably only inject my own assumptions into the piece. And then it's no good. And in fact, there is a piece in the flash paper where I did that and it was really didn't work. And the writer got frustrated and I could see it was because I had taken too strong of a hand and hadn't asked him what he was going for. And so, because I'm a human being and I can say these things to you on this podcast because I can see the ideals living in a shining way, but in the day-to-day, I don't always get there. So then it was just my responsibility to be like, okay, you know what? Well, this is actually a good example because the flash paper's goal is to let these artists say what they're trying to say. And it's not my job to tell them what they're supposed to think. It's my job to help shape their pieces to be as clear as possible about what it is they're trying to say.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a piece in the flash paper that has 3 sections, and I cut one of the sections entirely because I was like, I don't think that this is working. And he got really understandably frustrated, and for a variety of reasons, I was feeling the time pressure of when the issue was due to go to press and whatever. So I didn't really take the moment to ask him. And then when I did ask him questions, I then had to say, you know what? You are the one who needs to be right here. The whole goal of this publication that I have created is to give you the space to say what you need to say. So I had to do the sort of humbling thing of saying I was too hasty here.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to put this back in. So let's now go back in and work to make what you're making better. Now, at the end of the day, I still think that that section should have come out, but that's not the purpose of what I created.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like if the purpose of what I had created was to be like Rolling Stone, and I'm like, Rolling Stone would never say that, then maybe I could have made those decisions. But the flash paper isn't like that. We're not about having one editorial voice that everyone adheres to. We're
Mm-hmm.
about creating a platform for lots of voices to be heard in concert with one another. So then I went back in and I asked him questions, and we got the piece to a place that we were both happy with, but it was rooted finally in me listening to him and making the appropriate changes.
It's interesting to me to hear you say what you just said, that it finally was rooted in what he was trying to say and me helping him say it, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
If the goal were different, like you said, if you were Rolling Stone or if you were another publication, then yeah, it would be obviously a different intent and a different outcome. But I'm thinking in terms of leadership, when you're looking at something like this and you are trying to get a publication out, how much does the goal, the ultimate goal, matter? Is it a guidepost, or is it something that you can lay aside because, for example, deadlines? What do you do as far as the goal itself as a beacon for what you're trying to achieve versus the more practical concerns of releasing the publication on time with everything done, et cetera, et cetera?
Right. So that's a great question. With TDF Stages, the goal was always to create pieces that would give readers tools that would let them dig more deeply into the art that they were experiencing.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, there needed to be things in every piece that we publish in TDF Stages that explained what the artist's intentions were. And often we would have pieces that didn't quite get there. They sort of got lost in the weeds of artists talking in a more generalized way about the power of live theater and all of that. And it's a thing that happens all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So it would then be my responsibility to say, okay, TDF Stages needs this story to have a tool in it. That's the Rolling Stone example from before. But now I go to the writer and I say, okay, this is what we need. What is it that you most want to say, knowing that this is what we need? How do you interpret what I'm telling you the publication needs? What is your take on the piece you've written and how it can serve this mission? And inevitably, people would always have something. And I would have to often remind people, I would actually have to often give people permission to tell me the things that they were interested in, even though they very often would be like, well, I don't think anyone would be interested in this. It was just interesting to me. And I would often be like, no, but that's actually the part that's going to be really interesting. So let's dig into that. And that is a time where the mission became a guidepost that helped me ask the right types of questions. And yes, sometimes the piece is due and we don't have time and it doesn't quite get there. And so we make it good enough. That's just always going to be the case. There is no world of everything being ideal, as I'm sure you know quite well. And
Sure.
I haven't at this moment started editing on the second issue of the Flash paper. That'll come in a few weeks. So I only have the first issue as a guide, but that example of the piece I just gave you was so helpful because I had time. At the end of the day, I'm going to default to the Flash paper's mission when I don't have time to do anything else. And so it was just a good reminder, like I always need to be approaching every editing process from the point of view of the Flash paper of, well, what is it that the artist is trying to say? How can I help them say it the most clearly? Not what do I agree with, and therefore, et cetera, et cetera. What will I allow to go in? So with him, it was like, could we have gone back and forth on this for a few more days and made it even tighter and even more polished? Absolutely. But at the end of the day, when we had our deadline and we had to meet it, I'm glad that I ended up going with the the piece that it best reflects his original intention.
It's interesting though, because when you say that, at the end of the day, both ended up being true. And
Mm,
it's almost like I don't know if you've ever been bowling. When you see little kids go bowling and they put up those little guardrails so that no matter
right,
where the little kid throws the ball, eventually the ball's going to get towards the pins. And I feel
right.
sometimes like that is a leadership role. Is, yeah, these people are going to go somewhere. Your job is to help them get to where they wanted to go all along. Now, when you do that, when you have an artist or a writer who's decided that they want to say something, what happens when they're lost? What happens when they say, "I absolutely want to do this," and then they can't start? What is your role there, and how do you help them?
Mm. You mean like when someone is saying, I really do want to participate, or like, I know I'm going to write about this show. Well, actually, that's happened to me before. People will say, there were so many angles and this person talked about so much and I don't know what to do. The first thing is, and this is something I've had to learn as a writer myself, when you find yourself overwhelmed with something like that, go to the editor and ask them for help. And I think that is something that we can extrapolate to the rest of our lives. Like, don't be afraid to ask for help, because there are people who want to help and who are there to help and who are trained to help. I actually wrote an editorial for Fortune magazine about the flash paper and other things that just recently went online like 3 weeks ago.
Ah,
And I
excellent.
was completely stymied when I wrote the first draft, and I knew it wasn't right. And I thought, oh my God, this is correct. What do I do? And then I just remembered, oh, call the editor. The editor is actually there to help make it better. So I went to the editor and I said, here's what I'm trying to do. Here's what I have done. What is missing? And he had great insight and was listened to me carefully and then gave me great feedback, and I fixed it. And I was like, I rewrote the thing and it was great. So part of it is just like giving people the space to freak out and letting them not know, and then getting them to just talk and talk about what's interesting to them. I mean, it keeps coming back to this. And then offering up possibilities and then asking them which one feels in their gut like it's the most exciting, and then encouraging them to go after that. I find that process to be really fun, honestly.
It sounds really fun and also really, really helpful. It's interesting because you said earlier about holding space for other people to express themselves. And the flash paper certainly sounds like it's exactly that. You're holding space, but in a very, it is a crucible. It's a container for them to work out some of the things that they're thinking about and that they want to say. And yet, there's something else here that I would love to get your thoughts on, and that is the inspiration to do it to begin with.
Mm.
How does that work for you as a writer and also as, in this case, the boss?
The inspiration to, can you tell me a little bit more about what you mean?
Yeah, sure. I mean, you want to you said, like you said earlier, you went to the editor and you had an idea and you didn't know how to pursue it, and you went to the editor. And I want to step back. I want to talk a little bit about where your ideas come from
Mm.
as the editor versus as the writer.
Right. Because in my life, I have really made a lot of things. I've created magazines and film series and print publications. Like, I wish I had like a really practical answer for you, but it just seems like I have, fortunately in my life, never run out of aha moments, to use
Mm,
the Oprah term. Like,
hmm.
just consistently, I'm like, oh, that would be a fun thing to try. And, for better or for worse, I am someone who, if I decide I'm going to do something, I'm really good at finishing it. I just have whatever genetic code is needed to be like, I am now going to figure out how to put the pieces together, and then it's going to be done. But I, the ideas, it feels so inextricably linked to who I am as a person. I just
Mm.
like things. I'm curious about things. I'm interested in things. I like to hear what people have to say. And like, I, I guess my suspicion is that we all have ideas like this consistently about things that we could do or try. But for whatever reason, I have been able to develop a life in which I will hear those ideas and then I'll just run with them.
But you know what? It's not just running with them, it's paying attention. It's
Mm.
having the awareness. And also, I think, and I'd love to get your take on this, it's almost a giving yourself permission kind of thing, where you give yourself permission to have the idea and also to pursue it. And that might be so much part of who you are that you might not think about it on a conscious level. But I wonder if you could for a minute, did you ever give yourself permission, or was it always, I just have these ideas and I know I'm going to pursue them for you?
I think it helps a lot that I spent quite a few years in elementary school in this special class for gifted and talented students where there were only 11 of us. We were all grades. I was in the class from third through sixth grade. And the whole premise of the class is that you came into the class and you chose the 7 assignments that you were going to do that day from a sheet. And there were 7 subjects with 7 assignments each on the sheet. And you had a week to get them all done. Or like, I can't, like maybe there were 35 assignments. You did 7 assignments a day. Anyway, I was a self-directed learner for third, fourth, fifth, and sixth grades.
Mm.
And it actually trained me to think of learning as something that was my responsibility, but also my opportunity. And you would get to places on the sheet and it would be like, here you do a project, here you make something, here you write something. Like there were all of these opportunities that I would just be like, it was required that I come up with something to do. And so I did it. And I was trained in elementary school to give myself permission because it was the only way to finish the week in school. Now that I think about it, I've never really quite thought about it like that before, but, and I had a teacher and I had peers who said yes to the idea that it was important to have ideas and then see where they went. And also in that class, I had opportunity after opportunity to try something and then stop if it wasn't working. And I was very lucky in school. I went to public school in Chattanooga, Tennessee for my entire elementary school, middle school, and high school life. But I was very lucky over and over again to have teachers who would just be like, yeah, give it a shot. There's no harm in trying. And I think that has proven to be incredibly valuable for me. My parents too, to their credit, they were just like, yeah, okay, try it. You want to go write a play for your youth theater? Go for it. And I guess I was just in an environment as a child where I was always told that giving it a shot was worthwhile. And I have maintained that outlook. And, like the flash paper, I guess it was just like, this is going to be hard and I don't know how it's going to happen, but what do I have to lose is what I felt. And like, okay, if it doesn't happen, c'est la vie. I don't know. It's just like, that was the attitude I had. And I don't always have that. Sometimes I get really caught up in what are people going to think, and that completely shuts me down. But very often I will give myself that kind of permission. And I guess I'm also drawn to collaborators like that, because Sarah and I were on the phone one day talking for 45 minutes about a Lenny Kravitz song. And then we realized that could be a podcast. And then we were just like, okay, we'll try it. And 200 episodes later, here we are. And yeah, like you're so right that giving myself permission to do things it's important. And I guess, again, I've been trained since third grade to do it.
Well, yes and no. Okay. You haven't, yes, you have been trained, but also, you consciously do it consistently. And it may be unconscious for you nowadays, but consistently you decided, I know what let's do. I'm going to start a podcast about this. I'm going to start a podcast about that. I'm going to write this story. I'm going to make space for others. All of these things are things that you are deciding. And as a natural leader, yet at the same time, a natural collaborator, they must coexist in some way that works for you.
Mm.
And I'm wondering, how does the natural leader and the natural collaborator, how do those things coexist in one person? Do you understand my question?
Yes. How is it that I'm a leader and a collaborator simultaneously?
Yes.
Oh, God, yeah, I feel like if I had that answer, I would be Buddha, maybe.
Maybe. I don't ask easy questions, do I?
I also have this sort of ingrained belief that I'm not supposed to talk about myself very much, or it's going to sound like bragging. So I think it's actually, I'm finding some resistance in even thinking about the question because I don't necessarily want to come across like I'm arrogant, which is
You,
interesting.
it is interesting, and it's patently untrue. You are not arrogant. This is an exploration. It really is, of someone who has the ability to do both well and wants to keep doing it that way. So that's not bragging. That's exploring, because I think being able to do that is the sign of a true leader and also a sign of a true collaborator, because it's fluid. Those skill sets and those talents are fluid, and sometimes you need one and sometimes you need the other. So it's
Right.
not bragging. Please, 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 if you have an answer, I'd love to hear it.
It has something to do, well, first of all, thank you. I will take you at your word and move forward. Um, it has something to do with knowing, I know how it feels to be excluded. And so I also therefore know what I was missing. And I have an innate sensitivity to how people are feeling. I'm pretty empathic. And I know how to tell if someone feels included. And I want, and so I'm good at asking people questions and responding to them and then actually taking action steps that make them feel included. And then I also know what it feels like to lie about myself in order to gain approval or feel inclusion. And I
Mhm.
know how shitty that feels. Pardon my language. I don't know if we're supposed to curse on your podcast or not.
You can
I
absolutely curse. I could just put the little E for explicit and off we go. So
well,
don't worry about it.
I know how bad it feels to have lied about myself in order to gain acceptance or to feel included. So when I am making other people feel included, I also have to take care of myself and be gentle with myself, and to not then think that being inclusive means shutting myself down.
Mm.
Like and so I think that my leadership style is built around consistently checking in with myself and with everyone else to make sure that we're all feeling included. And
Mhm.
then if the roles are clear, and this is really big for me, I don't do well in environments where my role isn't very clear, where it's
Mm.
kind of like everybody's the leader, or like, I'm not saying that I need to work in a top down structure, but like, if Sarah and I are the leaders of the podcast, then we're the leaders of the podcast, and I can work with that. But I've had a lot of frustration in a work environment where no one seemed to be in charge of anything. I cannot work that way.
Mhm.
So once I know exactly what, if I'm the leader and I know that my ideas are and my generative qualities are like, I don't think I'm answering your question. I think I'm reverting back to the the details without getting at the meat somehow. Hmm.
And that's interesting, because on some level, I think you're absolutely answering the question. But on the other level, this is something that we might need to have like a glass of wine and sit down for the next 6 days and talk about it, because it's a huge topic. The idea of being able to do both simultaneously while staying true to who you are and feeling that you are honoring yourself and your process while at the same time honoring other people and their processes is huge. That I asked you a gigantic question because
Yeah.
I know you can handle it, but also it's not something that might be something that we should do another entire podcast episode about, because it is this idea of interpersonal connection and relationships in that way, where you really do honor yourself while at the same time honoring the other people in the process. That's not something we do. And it's, I think, probably really hard to articulate. So I don't think you're shying away from it. I think it's a big topic,
Yeah.
honestly. You
I
know?
also think that there's something about the fact that I am very good at being vulnerable.
Mm,
I put myself out there constantly. I so often feel exposed, but I feel like I have to do that because otherwise my life is going to be false.
hmm
And so much of, I'm just like, a lot of this also has to do with being a closeted young person in the South and coming from a family that sometimes would tell me not to let the world know who I was.
Mm.
I was raised with this sort of twin script of don't let people know that you're gifted because they'll think that you're better than they are, and don't let people know that you're gay because they'll reject you.
Hmm.
And I just, thank God, have got whatever internal fortitude is required to kick against that, even as it's hurting me. And like, at this point now, I just cannot do that. Like, I just don't want to ever be in an environment where I can't be as smart as I am and I can't be gay. So that leads to me making a lot of choices where I'm just like good at being vulnerable, because if I'm not vulnerable, if I'm not putting myself out there honestly, if I'm not saying who I actually am and what I actually want, then all that's going to happen is that I get something false. And it is worth the terror of being exposed to see what comes. And I just have some sort of inherent ability to rebound from the pain that comes when I am vulnerable and it doesn't work out. And that also then makes me able to be present for the vulnerable moments that really do work out. And it's something about that is what we're talking about too.
Absolutely, it is. And that resilience is something that we are not encouraged to explore or to wear. That idea of, yeah, I can fall down and be in pain, and yet I can also come back up from it and rise again. And
Yeah.
this is, you're touching on again another podcast episode that's going to be 4 hours long, because I think there's something really powerful about that idea of, especially when you have the double whammy of don't be outwardly gifted, don't be outwardly gay. That message, you had to actively, consciously and unconsciously fight against that and work through it. And there's something really powerful there in that very moment of deciding, no, I'm not going to let this bowl me over. And I think maybe that's another one of those facets of everything we've just been talking about that is so important to explore.
Yeah, and then another thing, when I first got to New York and I was working as a critic, a theater critic, I got so much direct negative feedback about how happy and optimistic I was.
Mm.
I was told that it made me seem superficial. I was told I was too happy to be trusted. I was told that people assume, I got that thing where people are talking about you and they're saying, no one trusts you, that no one's that polite unless they're out to get something. You are in an all about Eve situation. You're just being nice to people to try to get things from them. And I was like, my God, no, I'm just like in a good mood. I'm just a happy person. And I just remember also consciously thinking, well, F y'all, I will not become cynical because it makes you comfortable. And then later on, after I got over that part of it, I was able to see, okay, many people in the world are choose cynicism to protect themselves, because
Mm.
being vulnerable and liking things sets you up to be criticized and hurt. And
Mm.
it can feel safer to hide behind cynicism and immediate negativity, because it's hard. Like, if you are constantly saying that you don't like something, that's not vulnerable. You're actually shielding yourself from anything, because you're like, I don't like that, I don't like that, I don't like that, that sucks, that's a bad piece of writing, whatever. Like, that is protection. And it's like, then I remember, okay, people who feel that way have been so wounded. And I am lucky that I'm not organized that way, and I can still have access to joy and vulnerability. So rather than being mad at people who are fighting against me, why don't I just be grateful that I am functioning the way I am, and maybe again try to make space where other people can re-access the what I know to be the really empowering possibility of being vulnerable and joyous. Oh, something like that. That's in there too somewhere.
Wow. Wow. Yes, absolutely. Everything you just said and then some. And it's fascinating to me that idea of cynical people, just it's a shield. It's a shield against that vulnerability. There's something, again, yet another podcast episode, we should come back and talk about it, because there's something really powerful about opening that door and saying, you know what, I am going to be honestly me, honestly who I am, honestly what
Yes.
I like. There's power in that. And especially in situations where, for example, in the theater, it's this is inherently a vulnerable industry. It's
Yes.
inherently vulnerable, and it's hard to be that way when you have to be that way on stage or on screen or whatever, and maintain a sense of self and self-awareness. That's a challenge, and my hat is off to all people involved in the industry who are able to do that.
Yes. And at the end of the day, I also think the people who are the most cynical are actually the most idealistic, and
Hmm.
they've been hurt too many times. And now they're trying to shield themselves. But I actually think that that means that inside there is actually the softest, gentlest, most joyous heart. And it's like, just like we all need to give ourselves permission to just try again.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. Yes, completely. And that warm, gooey center is often at the heart of somebody who has the hardest exterior, for sure.
Yes,
Uh, I think we're on the same page about that.
I
Now,
agree.
Mark, I can keep you here for the next 4 hours and we could chat, but I know that you you have a day to get back to. I wanted to find out from you. First of all, I want to thank you. This has been such a delight to get a chance to chat with you about all of the things that you're doing, the flash paper, Mark and Sarah. That we didn't really get the chance to talk about the Show Tunes Countdown. Can you talk about that for a minute before we draw this wonderful chat to a close?
Sure. As I look at the time, I have 6 minutes. Let's do it.
Okay.
So the Show Tune Countdown is a show that I host for iHeartRadio Broadway, in which every week I count down the 10 most crucial musical theater songs in a whimsical category. So
I love it.
we just did an episode on best dance breaks in a musical. We've also recently done best Andrew Lloyd Webber, or most overlooked Andrew Lloyd Webber songs, or most underappreciated Andrew Lloyd Webber songs. All kinds of things like that. And the listeners through social media vote for songs that should be on each countdown. And then when I talk about the songs on the countdown, it's also an opportunity to sneak in a little dramatic analysis, because I talk about how the
I
songs
love it.
function in the story. And, it's a mixture between geeking out because I think that so and so diva is just fabulous and I love listening to her voice, and then also being like, oh, and this song is really interesting because of how it impacts the story here. And it's a combination of the silly, the sublime, and the analytical.
I love it. Oh, I'm gonna have to subscribe to that because that warms the musical theater nerd cockles of my heart. And I know that you have a bunch of social media, and I think instead of spending time on that, because I have one last question for you before we head off into the night, I'm going to put all of your social media on the show notes: Twitter, Instagram. Your website is markgblankenship.com.
Yes.
All of that stuff will be on the show notes. And so I encourage all of you to find his podcasts. Obviously, you know that they're wonderful. And also the flash paper. All of that is going to be on the show notes. And I have one last question for you before you have to run off. And it's a question I ask everybody on the show. And it's a silly question, but I find that it often gives a really profound answer. And the question is this: if you had an airplane that could skywrite anything for the whole world to see, what would you say?
Hmm. I would just say you deserve to be loved.
Beautiful. I love it. I love it. That there's no more that needs to be said. Mark, I want to thank you so much for being on the show, for taking the time to chat about all of your various projects. And I'm really grateful that you took the time.
Oh gosh, it was such a treat. Yeah, this is really fun.
I'm so glad. And this is Isolde Trachtenberg for the Innovative Mindset Podcast. I hope that you enjoyed what you heard. If you did, leave a review. Follow Mark on Twitter, Instagram, find his website, find his podcast, find the flash paper. You're going to love getting to know Mark even better from here on in. Until next time, this is Isolde Trachtenberg. And I'm going to tell you, as I always do, keep breathing, keep singing. Thanks so much for joining me today. I really appreciate you being here. Today's episode was produced by Isolde Trachtenberg and is copyright 2020. As always, please remember this is for educational and entertainment purposes only. Past performance does not guarantee future results, although we can always hope. Until next time, this is Isolde Trachtenberg, and I send you all of my love.